So thank you, Len, again for your nice presentation of myself, and also thank you all of you for coming, and Asefa for inviting me to give the motivating talk to the graduate students. As you can see here, this is going to be a history of constant work and hard work to get to what we have discovered. So the story started, as you see it in the title, when I was an undergraduate student, and we had a field trip in the southern peninsula of Haiti with Dr. Robert Cornett, the first person I have in this list. And that's when I saw those rocks that are going to really define most of my research in the Caribbean Sea. All the other people you see here are collaborators, students who helped me in the field, and Jim Hayes, who was my advisor, Tsunema Saito, who told me that we had the KT boundary, of course, Gautam Sen, all the ones that you will see in the course of this presentation. So how it started is that we will have first the findings, what motivated me to do it, then the discoveries and the aftermath. That means after the Alvarez's discovery of the Gubbio section. So again, as you see, this is definitely geared toward the graduate students so that they can understand and appreciate the value of the dedication of their work, because they need to really have a lot of dedication in order to do it. So let's start with this philosophical thinking from a young man. He tells you a dream doesn't become reality through magic. It takes sweat, determination, and hard work. This is very much the same in sciences. So that's the beginning here, the motivation. That's where we had the field trip in the southern peninsula of Haiti. And I was absolutely amazed to see the rocks there. They were very nice, brown, deep brown, green, blue. That was part of the Macaya Formation. So those rocks, they stayed in my mind for whatever reason. Of course, I left Haiti. I went to go to study in France. I came back to the United States, to Colombia, and my advisor gave me the opportunity to go to the Caribbean Sea, deep sea drilling leg 15. That was in 1970. And again, another discovery, another amazement. The rocks that we were pulling up at site 146, 149, they were exactly the same as the rocks that I saw in the Southern Peninsula. Those are the kind of rocks. And fortunately, we also reached the basement. That means those rocks were also over those basaltic rocks that you see here. So then I decided that I must go back to Haiti and do field work. And I applied for an NSF grant, which I obtained, so I could go to Haiti and do some real field work. The first work that we had was actually in the northern area of Haiti with some colleagues from Colombia and this one from Nova, where we determined how the actual island was uplifting. So that's the first one. We definitely see that the island of Hispaniola is rising. Then, why is it rising? Of course, that goes to the tectonic. The tectonic is such that the little Caribbean plates that you see here is being squeezed between the North American plate, the South American plate, and being pushed by the Cocos plate. And this is why you have uplifting as those fragments of the Caribbean crust are being broken up and pushed up. So let's see what we can find in the Southern Peninsula. Again, efforts and courage. It's not enough. We need purpose, as said by John Kennedy. Again, you graduate students, you're going to work hard. That's going to take a lot of times in your life. But most importantly, you have to have a purpose and direction of what you want to do, what you have in mind. And this is what we did. Of course, we studied the southern peninsula of Haiti, and sure enough, we, through the petrology, the geochemistry, with those associates, we determined that the southern peninsula of Haiti was actually an upraised Caribbean sea crust. This is what you see here. The very same kind of rocks that we had in the deep sea drilling project, whereby you have Cretaceous pelagic sediments over the basalt. But at the same time, the next big discovery is going to be some kind of disrupted, or I would say, get me mixed in my interpretation, because as you can see here, the basalt is very wetted. Now, these basalts, as you've seen here, those are the basement rocks that you find all the way along the southern peninsula of Haiti, which are not part of the south of the northern side of Haiti. So this is truly the Caribbean sea crust that has been pushed up with deep sea sediments on top of it. Now, those basalts, again, by doing very hard work and very systematic, because I was determined to see exactly what are the relationship between those deep sea sediments and the basement rocks that we have here. So I was practically taking samples centimeter by centimeter until I find some forams, because going back to the lab, I was studying those forams since we were trained at Columbia to know all the index forams. What I saw is that the forams here were not the kind of forams that I was used to. They were very small. I could not identify them. So immediately I sent those samples to Suni Saito at Lamont, Columbia University. And he told me, this is the first time we have those kind of forams almost anywhere in the world. You should go back because you must have the very, very bottom part of the tertiary or the Paleogene. If you have this Paleogene, you must have the Katy boundary. So what did I do? The next weekend, I went to Haiti and did a systematic sampling of the rocks. And sure enough, the Katy boundary was there. But as you can see here, the coarse material that was in between, I interpreted it as basaltic turbidite because they look very much like the basaltic rocks that we had in Southern Peninsula. And I was not familiar with tektite. As a matter of fact, even Alvarez at that time had not published his paper. So this is the first publication saying that we had a turbidite at the Katy boundary. So that's where the Baylock Formation, that's where it's very famous now because everybody since then have been to Baylock to see the formation. So we have the basement rocks, again, the purples are the basaltic rocks and the greens are the Cretaceous ones. So this is the Baylock site. Then I organized a symposium in Haiti. That's where I published the first paper about the Katy boundary, again, in 1979. And this is the Katy boundary. So as you can see here, the very first sampling program was very difficult because this is extremely steep and the boundary is just about here. But after a while, we get used to it. We could actually go up and down way to take the samples. Then of course, when I published this paper, a lot of people went to Haiti to take samples. That was a big deal about that time. And in the process, we hired Gautam. But before that, the Alvarezes published a paper in 1980. And of course, this is when they came with the hypothesis of the impact. What is the relationship between the impact and Haiti? The Alvarez is published. They said, okay, we had an impact based on the iridium levels, as you can see here. And also they published, because this is the science paper, the same kind of foraminifera that I had in the Cretaceous tertiary boundary of Haiti, whereby the Cretaceous forams, they are very large, very easy to identify. And once you pass that boundary, you have only very, very, very tiny forams. So I called Walter because I did know Walter when I was at Lamont. He was actually at that time a postdoc. And I told him that I must have the Katy boundary if he could do the iridium analysis for me. Then he sent me to Frank Asaro, who did the iridium analysis. And sure enough, we had the big peak there. But still, I did not know about those tektites. The Alvarez's, they emitted their hypothesis based on previous work by Ahrens and O'Keefe, who were studying lunar impacts. So that's how they knew, based on the kind of iridium that they had, that must have been an object coming from outer space, and they calculated the size of the impact crater that could be produced by that impact of an object about 10 kilometers in diameter. So the Alvarez's, they studied the site in Italy, where they had extremely small tektites. So most of their study was based on the iridium, not so much on the tektites. But according to this hypothesis here, where they are located, they must be extremely far away from the site because the tektites are extremely small. Now, in Haiti, when I told everybody that I had those actually, I didn't know that I had the Katy boundary and I had this material. First, it was Alan Hildebrand who came here, and he looked at my sample. He said, I'm going to analyze them. He was a graduate student. And he told me, Florentin, those are tektites, not basaltic turbidites. And I said, okay, fine. Then we have an impact, and the impact is very close to Haiti somewhat because we have the largest tektite. So that's when Glenn Isaac, again, everybody jumped. Glenn Isaac came and analyzed those tektites, and he confirmed those are the tektites from an impact. And this is what we have at the boundary layer in Haiti. So if you have some of those tektites, they are dumbbell shapes and so on, perfect. But they are very large, which means that those large tektites must be relatively close to the impact site. That was the big deal, because nowhere else did they have large tektites like this. So based on the size of those tektites, they knew that the impact site must be somewhere in the Caribbean or in Central America, but nearby. Hildebrand continued his work. Of course, this is the tektites that Isaac sent to me. Beautiful. As you see, they are drop shape because those are molten materials that were falling down and they become crystallized. And we were very fortunate because some of those tektites, again, that was a big deal for the tektites in Haiti, because some of those tektites had the core very well preserved. And they could analyze not only the chemical content of those tektites, but also to radiometrically date them. So this is what Isaac did. And of course, Hildebrand did most of the geochemistry as well. So then it was a disappointment for me because at first I thought they were turbidites, but they were not. Then we have to accept the fact that the sciences, we have to go along with what is right. Why I'm saying this is because at that time, there was this antagonism between the Alvarez's and some other scientists who did not want to see there was an impact. So this is why my original interpretation of the turbidites, saying those were basaltic turbidites, gave some credence to what the other people were saying, that yes, we have the Katy boundary, but there is no real tektites. But when I saw there were tektites, so there were tektites. So we keep going. So that's why here I took the idea from Martin Luther King. We're disappointed, but we have hope because we can have better findings. So the aftermath, which means that we discovered first that the Southern Peninsula is truly the Caribbean crust that has been uplifted. Second, we find that the Southern Peninsula does have the Katy boundary, and the Katy boundary has those large tektites. So that's almost like the gold rush of the Katy boundary at that time, because everybody was rushing to take it. So fortunately, we had the opportunity to publish, thanks to Gautam Sen. And at that time, of course, we had our probe. He could do the analysis in-house. So we published this paper to show the Katy boundary in Haiti. And as you can see here, and I will show it later more, let's see here in this one, the Katy boundary, unlike most of what had been published saying it was a tsunami with turbidity, actually a lot of the other people I will show you later were saying it was a tsunami, and we had a layer that is practically graded layer, like a normal graded layer that you find in turbidites. But what we saw in Haiti was that the layer was not simple, as you can see here. Of course, we do have, as you can see in, let's see, my cursor is not doing it. As you can see in the iridium level coincide with the Katy boundary, but at the same time, the boundary itself was very disturbed, which implies it was not just a simple accumulation at one time. Something disturbed it. In our paper in Science, that's why we said impacts, and like you see here, that's why we say impacts, because you cannot have one layer like this with a simple impact. But the other possibility also is that during or immediately after the impact, you could have some disturbance at the bottom of the ocean that will cause what the pattern that we saw. So we continue. Again, Hildebrand published their paper. They suggested the Yucatan Peninsula as the site. Why? Because the Yucatan Peninsula had a series of cenotes. Those are karst, that means dissolved limestone. And those dissolved limestone, they were in a pattern, in a circular pattern that looked very strange. So Hildebrand and Penfield, actually it's Penfield who did the work of the cenotes, they determined that that may be the site of the impact, and those cenotes are caused by the pattern of the original structure of the crater, as predicted by the Alvarez's, because the Alvarez's predicted about 180 kilometers in diameter for an impact object of 10 kilometers in diameter. And sure enough, when they did the gravity survey, they did the seismic survey, they saw this was the impact site. So that was the end of the story. We know now this is the real reason that we had this catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous. The impact site was right there. So again, so many papers were published at that time. Again, Walter Alvarez, myself, so many other people, the Lunar Planetary Conference. Again, this was the big golden time of the Haiti boundary. There were meetings all over the place, all kinds of papers. Another one here to date it with Carl Swisher. So that's the big time of the Haiti boundary for everybody. And the next time will be that the Haiti boundary now was well known all over the world. They knew there was an impact, but nobody really approached the problem of why do we have in certain places the boundary is not just a unique layer. It looks like it is disturbed. So that's why my colleague, Marcos Lamoda, and another colleague from England, we organized that conference in 2003 in Caravaca, Spain. That was the biotic events. And that's when I published this paper with a series of colleagues, as you can see here. And within that paper, we took the opportunity to look at many Haiti boundaries and how we could explain why it was so disturbed. Actually, the first person who saw that the Haiti boundary was disturbed was Jody Bourgeois, who published that paper in 1988. But again, she said that was a tsunami, and the tsunami really caused all those disturbances. But again, it's not quite right, because how could you have fine layers and then coarse layers, fine layers, coarse layers, fine layers, coarse layers? But actually, she is the first one who came with the idea that the layer was disturbed by the tsunami. The problem is when you have a tsunami, the tsunami is just moving in one direction. It does not go back. And when you see those structures, those are structures of oscillation. So it could not be really a tsunami. And we saw the same thing at other sites, Bermuda Rise, and this is deep sea. Then other site, Black Nose. Again, if you look very close, it is also disturbed. The Demerara Rise also disturbed. Cape Verde Basin, deep sea, also disturbed. So what are the possible explanations for the disturbance? That's when we came with the idea that because of the impact, the waves that traveled through the crust will cause the ocean bottom to move up and down and cause a movement of oscillation. And until today, we do have some of those phenomena, because when there are some major earthquakes, we have the seiche phenomenon in basins as far as 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 kilometers away. Like there was a big earthquake in Portugal. We had seiche in pools in Puerto Rico. There are seiche in pools even in Alaska. So this is how we determine that the movement that occurred in the water column was not just a simple tsunami. It was an oscillation movement that will depend on the shape of the basin, the depth of the basin, and of course, the relative distance from the impact. So this is the reason why the basins will go into oscillation, but the oscillation is not going to be exactly the same everywhere. But everywhere that you go, if you look at those sediments, you will see there is some kind of back and forth movement, which is the oscillation movement that you have in a seiche. So this is what we proposed at that time. But unfortunately, this paper was published in the Iberian Geology, so not too many people really knew about it. So this is why 30 years later, after I discovered the Katy boundary, and almost 20 years later after we proposed the SESH, when Robert DePalma discovered the Katy boundary in North Dakota, he called me. First of all, he wasn't sure that was the Katy boundary. And I told him, send me some of those samples and I will see whether they are tektites, because he wasn't sure whether those were tektites and so on. And once I saw they were tektite, I told him, definitely you have the Katy boundary there. And of course, most of his work has been done at Lamont, when I say Lamont, no, at FIU in our, FCAM center. That's where he did all his chemical analysis of the sample. And then of course, once we knew it was the Katy boundary, all the other people, of course, they jumped in. So all of those really became secondary to the research. But the structure that he had, again, I do not have a picture of it here, but the structure that he had were very similar to the structure that we had at the Katy boundary in Haiti and so on. This is why you see in his title, the onshore search, the onshore surge is our interpretation is due to a SESH phenomenon, which means that the basin went into oscillation, and this is why he had those different layers, very similar to what we had in Texas, very similar to what we have in Haiti, and very similar to what we have everywhere else. So that's the big impact of the impact, in the sense that people now they realize that we did have an impact, and now they know, based on this paper from the National Academy of Science, that we did have those surges that were not just simple turbidites or simple tsunamis, because the waves, they went back and forth into the basin. So that's the conclusion of what all of those different steps led to, that we had the impact, and the impact now disturbed the whole ocean basins at different scales. Then further studies will show everywhere else what kind of oscillation we have in all the different basins. But again, this is to show students that you can make mistakes, honest mistakes, and you can have interpretation and go back to your interpretation based on the facts, because you have to deal with the facts. This is why, in conclusion, I am telling you here, the roots of true achievement lie in the will to become the best that you can become. So always try your best when you're doing your research. The second conclusion from Martin Luther King, again, we must accept finite disappointment. As I mentioned to you, at first, we were disappointed in the fact that those were not turbidite. Not only they were not turbidite, they were not the basaltic turbidites, they were in fact tektites. But we did not lose hope. We just accommodated ourselves to the new findings and keep going. The third one, again, you have to have patience, because all things are difficult before they become easy. You need to have a lot of patience in your work. The last one is by our famous Albert Einstein. Learn from yesterday. Live for today, do your research, and hope for tomorrow. You may find some great things. But the important thing is not to stop questioning. As scientists, you need to be patient, you need to be honest, and you must have a purpose and continue it no matter what happens. So I will thank you for your listening, and I wish you good luck and have a great day. Thank you again.